Yesterday, Sayadaw explained that by letting the mind go free without any control on the desirable objects and sense objects, without suppressing or controlling the mind, letting it go freely on these 5 kinds of sense objects, is called Paṇḍitā. And Sayadaw explained by using example. If one does not hurt one's own cattle, if one let the cattle free, then if the cattle go in the pasture, it is okay. But if the cattle go into other people's farm, then one is disturbing others. So in the same way, people who cannot do without sensual objects, if they let their mind go free on the sensual objects that one is not entitled to, then one is failing one's own responsibility as a human being. So just like it is said that if the cattle go into the pasture, it is okay. But if the cattle go into other people's farm, then other people are disturbed. So in the same way, if one is letting one's mind go freely on the sensual objects that one is not entitled to, then one is trespassing. So it is very important not to let even the mind go onto the sensual objects that one is not entitled to. So if one lets the mind go free on these sense objects which are not entitled to, then she is said to be mad with greed, mad with lust. So it is very important not to trespass, not to transgress, not to let the mind go free on the sensual objects that one is not entitled to. So it is the duty or responsibility of each and every one who is not free from these sensual objects. So even when enjoying the sensual objects that one owns, she must practice moderation in the sensual pleasure. So if one is wasting one's time with the sensual pleasure, then she will only be getting dangerous kind of happiness and fatal kind of happiness. So if she is spending time only on the sensual pleasure that is dangerous and fatal, then she will lose or will have no chance to get Amanussirati or Dhammarati, the kind of Dhamma pleasure that excels so many times than the worldly pleasure. So if people are satisfied with the sensual pleasure, then they are not going to get the Dhamma pleasure that excels so many times than the worldly pleasure. In this way, they will be losing the best kind of happiness, the best kind of pleasure. Even though having pleasure with the sensual objects that one owns So it is not blameful in the worldly sense, but even the pleasure, the sensual pleasure one is entitled to, one must practice moderation, one must practice austerity in this sensual pleasure. So if one sets a limit to the sensual pleasure, even if it is the kind of pleasure one is entitled to, then one can take time away in order to get the kind of pleasure that has a guarantee and the kind of pleasure that excels so many times than the worldly pleasure. So the cars and vehicles are very useful in order to go from one place to another. But the vehicle must have engine that is in good condition. And also the vehicle must have a steering. If the vehicle does not have any steering, then it will not do. And if the car doesn't have a brake, or if the brake is out of order, then it cannot be used. So when driving a car, it is important that the engine must be in good condition, the steering must be working properly, and also the brake must not be out of order. So in the same way, in life, one should have control or steering, just like in a car. If someone is going to go above the limit, then one should control it right away, just like driving with the steering. And in the same way, when one is going to transgress or go above the limit, you must control it and you must stop, just like pushing the brake of the car. Even though one is doing something that is good, but without any limit is no good. So the food can nourish the body, but if one takes a lot of food, over the limit, then it is going to be dangerous. So the same goes with the medicine. If one takes overdose of the medicine, then it is harmful. So in the same way, even though one is doing something which is lawful and which is permissible by the society, but if one is doing it over the limit, then it will not be good. So if one is freeing oneself without any control, freeing the mind without any control, then it will not be good. So if one is indulging one's craving, if one is letting the mind go free too much in the sensual pleasure, then one is losing time in order to get the real kind of pleasure, the Dhamma pleasure, which has a guarantee. So if a person is having too much fun with the sensual objects, so much so that one is losing or one is failing to get the kind of Dhamma pleasure, which is a guarantee, then it is not good. So one must be mindful not to go off the limit. So in the Dhamma Vinaya, the doctrine and the discipline of the Buddha, there are definite guidance in order to bring benefit, and also there is discipline, rule in order to keep the body, speech and mind proper. So the usage that the Buddha used is very good, and in these teachings and the discipline in order to bring benefit and to make the body and mind proper, in these teachings Buddha used sati, mindfulness, as rekha varana goti. So it means protection, blockage, blocking or having security. So these words may be different, but it has the similar meaning. So rekha means protecting or guarding. When one is protecting or guarding, then one is said to be blocking so that unwanted things cannot enter. So one should guard and protect so that unwanted states will not come into oneself or come into one's life. So it is a way of blocking so that unwanted things cannot enter. So by guarding or protecting, blocking of the unwanted things is also done. So one should practice so as to block or one has to practice so that one should block the unwanted state so that his or her body and speech will become pure, clean, tamed, peaceful and lovable. And one should also make secure so that one will not be losing what one is seeking for. So if one loses whatever one has gained, then it will be a waste of time. So one needs to also have security, goti. So in this Dhamma Vinaya, in the teaching of the Buddha, this rekha varana goti, protection, blocking or security, it is very essential. So one needs to have this protection, blockage and security so that the defilements or pollutants cannot come into the mind. So one needs to prevent the defilements from coming in, and if one is making progress, then his or her body, speech and mind will be blameless, pure and clean. So one needs to be careful not to lose purity of body, speech and mind. So it is important to have security so that one does not lose purity of body, speech and mind. So in Buddha's teaching, in many places of this Buddha's teaching, the word rekha varana goti is used in many places. If one is letting one's mind go freely on the essential objects, without having control of the mind with mental development practice, bhavana. And if one is thinking freely on these sensual objects, then one is losing purity of mind. And one is also losing maturity of mind. So the strength of the mind and the maturity of the mind is very essential. So if one is losing strength of the mind and maturity of the mind, then it is called pamāda. So when one is coming across the essential objects every day, and if one's mind is weak, then one is indulging in these sensual desire for these sensual objects. So what these sensual objects do is that they tie up the person. They tie or they make a bondage or they captivate the person who indulges in this greed for the sensual objects, so that she cannot escape. So when meeting the worldly conditions, when meeting up and downs of life, the ones who do not have any spiritual resistance, there will be elation and depression and so on. If one does not reform one's mind in order to have spiritual stamina, then one's mind will be very weak. From the time of birth, from the very beginning of one's life, avidya, ignorance, not knowing the truth, knowing wrongly, and tanha, craving various kind of objects, craving for new existences. So this avidya and tanha, ignorance and craving, has been following in a very latent form, dormant or latent form throughout life. So if one does not make the mind mature by practicing satipatthana meditation, then the mind is not going to get matured automatically. Just the body may be growing old gradually, but the mind will stay still tender and weak if the person does not reshape his or her mind with mindfulness practice. So Sayadaw gives an example. Young tender fruits cannot withstand heat or cold. So in the same way, weak tender mind cannot withstand worldly conditions, ups and downs of life. So the person whose mind is weak, whose mind is not matured, when she come across pleasant states or desirable states, then one will become elated and one will be greedy. And when coming across undesirable things, there will be hatred, aversion. So these greed, anger, or hatred will be overwhelming the person whose mind is weak, who does not have any spiritual stamina. So just like when a small tender fruit faces heat or cold, it can become destroyed. So in the same way, weak, tender mind will get ruined by coming across good and bad objects. So when the person who has a weak mind, who is not matured, come across desirable object, she will be elated. And when coming across undesirable condition, she will feel depressed. So if one is elated or depressed with good and bad things she come across, then this kind of life is not desirable. So it shows that the person is not working in order to have strength in the mind. So it is obvious that the person is not making use of the time in order to get mental strength, which is really important. Because she is not building up mental strength, she cannot cope with the worldly conditions. It is because she does not practice so as to make the mind matured. The mind that is not shaped with mental development practice, bhavana, then the mind will be weak. It will not have strength. And this kind of mind is said to be small, inferior, and tender. When one says the mind is small, it means that the mind does not have any strength, but it is weak. So when she comes across objects that induces lobha and dosa, she will love or hate very easily. So it shows that the mind is not matured. The mind does not have spiritual stamina in order to withstand the worldly condition. So this kind of mind in Burmese is called a brittle mind or a sensitive mind that is very quick to respond. So whenever one comes across good objects, there will be greed or love. And when one comes across undesirable objects, there will be hatred, aversion. So in this way, the mind is sensitive to respond. So in Burmese, it is called brittle mind. Because the mind does not have a strength. So the mind that is not shaped or formed or molded with Satipatthana practice, then the mind is not going to be developed or matured. So it is very important in order to develop the mind so that the mind will be matured. If the person is wasting time with having fun with the sensual pleasure and sensual objects, they are wasting the precious time, and they are said to be losing wholesomeness. So if one is forgetful or if one is negligent, there is going to be failure and loss. And if one is not forgetting, if one is mindful, then she will profit. So if the mind is quick to respond, So it does not end all of a sudden. It doesn't go off. But what happens is that when the person comes across desirable objects, there will be love, greed, and when it becomes stronger, there will be craving and clinging, and one will go over it over and over again. So just like the cattle, cows, after they've been grazing in the pasture, eating the grass, so at night time, they will chew what they have eaten in the daytime. So they call the cow ruminate. So in the same way, when the person is quick to respond, and when coming across this desirable object, there will be greed. It will go on to craving, clinging. He, she will go over this again and again, just like the cattle ruminate. And when the person comes across undesirable objects, there will be hatred, aversion, and this hatred and aversion does not go off, but he, she will be going over it again and again. So these greed, hatred, aversion will be going on, and the person can even get illness. And there will be grudge also. So if the person is loving or having greed, he, she will not think whether or not it is lawful or unlawful. And when the person hates or has aversion towards something, he, she will not think it whether it is lawful or unlawful. Whenever he, she gets the opportunity, he, she will do whatever he, she wants. So this happens because there is no rakha varana goti, there is no protection, blockage or security. So one should have security so as not to destroy the wanted things. If there is no security, then there will be danger. So throughout one's life, there are desirable and undesirable things. There will be love and hate. So one cannot be free from the bondage of kilesa, defilements. If one is not free from the bondage of kilesa, defilements, then one will not get moti or vimoti, one will not get freedom or deliverance. One's mind will be agitated with greed. The mind will be agitated with dosa, anger, hatred. And the mind can be agitated with delusion, envy, jealousy. So if the mind is agitated with these defilements, the mind will not be calm and there will not be any peace. But he, she will be in grief and sorrow. So this is the cause it is the cause that most of the people are not in peace, because their minds are agitated with these defilements. That's why they also have endless social problems. So Buddha gave the method that one should refrain from the misconduct. If one cannot refrain from misconduct, there will be pamada. And the ones who cannot stay without sensual pleasure or sensual objects, they should have moderation. They should be moderate in having these sensual pleasure, so that it will not be extreme or it will not go off the limit. So one should have control on oneself, so that one will not end up in grief or sorrow. So one should prevent, one should cure, and one should suppress these, so that these defilements will be overcome. And yogis who are practicing, they are making use of the method that Buddha had prescribed. If they practice according to the guidance given by the Buddha, if they practice respectfully, meticulously, then the mind will become strengthened amazingly, and one will be developing knowledge, and the knowledge will become matured. When the knowledge becomes matured, the mind will also be matured, and the mind can withstand the worldly conditions, good and bad conditions. So that's why it is very important to develop knowledge, so that one will gain maturity of mind. When the mind is matured, then the mind will be in the state of equilibrium, or the mind will be in equipoise. So in order to protect the mind, one should be mindful at the moment of arising, and also at the moment of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, bending, stretching, rising, falling. Whenever they arise, one should be mindful. One should protect the mind with mindfulness. So in order to be mindful at the moment of arising, one should aim the mind towards the object, and one should put effort so that the mind will fall onto the object. When one is able to note with aiming and effort, the noting mind will fall onto the object, and the noting mind will stick on the object. So that's why the yogi should note whatever object that arises, such as rising and falling of the abdomen, with aiming and effort, so that the mind will be protected with mindfulness. When the mind is protected with mindfulness, then the unpleasant, then the kind of state, undesirable kind of state, cannot enter into the mind. So the mind will be blocked away from unwanted states, unwanted defilements, and thus the mind will be safe and secure. So it is said to be blocking the raga dosa that can arise by lack of mindfulness. So there will be rekha varana kuti, there will be protection, blockage, security, so that the defilements cannot enter. So the mind will be guarded, protected, blocked, and secure. So it is very satisfying to get to the stage of this having protection, blockage, and security of the mind. So developing this kind of protected mind, which is safe and secure away from these defilements, one should develop this kind of mind repeatedly over and over again with mindfulness, so that the mind will become from small to big, from tender to ripe, from less to many. So making the mind developed strong and many is called bhavana. So by practicing the Satipatthana meditation, knowledge will get matured and one will discern mind and matter, and one will be developing knowledge stage by stage. So one should not be negligent, one should not fail to be mindful, and one should also practice austerity or moderation in sensual pleasure, and one should practice the mental development practice in order to develop the mind and the knowledge. So by developing knowledge, the mind will become matured, it will have spiritual stamina, so that one will gain upper hand of these defilements. So practicing Satipatthana meditation is the way of strengthening the mind so that necessary strength will be developed, so that knowledge will develop, and also one's mind can become matured. So today 1 hour is up, so Jaraji will continue to explain next day. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.